hate reliving this next story, but I feel like it is so uniquely crazy that I need to share it with the world. Last year, I managed to get a week and a half of paid time off from my job, so I decided to use the opportunity to travel back home to see my parents. I currently live and work down in South Carolina, but the rest of my family still lives up in Massachusetts. It's obviously not right around the corner, but it's a relatively straight shot and an easy drive nonetheless. My parents are getting up there in age and are fully retired. They don't really get to leave the house very much these days because my dad severely hurt his lower back right before he retired. My genius idea for this trip was that I was going to drive throughout the night, arrive early in the morning, and completely surprise them. The only person I actually told about my plan was my older brother, just so somebody out there knew I was on the road. Usually, I absolutely despise driving long distances at night, but I've found through past experience that this specific route is way easier to manage overnight. There just isn't that much commercial traffic on the highway, so I can just throw on a podcast or a playlist and chill out while I drive. My absolute least favorite part of the entire drive is when I have to pass through Pennsylvania. No disrespect intended to my people living in Pennsylvania, but crossing that state just feels like it takes an absolute eternity. It is entirely made up of dark mountains and endless winding roads. Not to mention, I feel like every single time I drive through PA, the weather conditions are so incredibly foggy that I feel like I'm driving blind through an endless wall of solid white. This specific trip was absolutely no different. I was white-knuckling my steering wheel through the mountains until I suddenly came across a flashing orange detour sign. Apparently, there was a major multi-car accident further up the highway, so all traffic was being redirected off the main interstate and onto local rural roads. I followed the signs and continued driving for what felt like a lifetime, quickly realizing I was completely lost. It was just a pitch-black, deeply foggy two-lane road surrounded by dense woods. There was absolutely no sign of civilization or life anywhere. To make matters worse, my phone completely lost all cellular service out in the mountains, so I couldn't even pull up a map to figure out where the detour was taking me. By this point, it had been hours since I left South Carolina, and the sheer mental exhaustion was hitting me hard. I was desperately looking out for a gas station, a 24-hour diner, or even just a designated rest stop. I just needed to pull over and shut my eyes for a quick second, but I didn't feel comfortable or safe sleeping on the narrow shoulder of this desolate mountain road. Something about driving through thick fog and focusing extra hard on the road lines makes your brain super tired. Before I knew it, I started to doze off purely from exhaustion. I knew I should have pulled over the exact second I started doing the classic heavy head drop, but I stupidly thought I could hold on just a little while longer until I found a lit parking lot. Well, I couldn't. I dozed off for a second too long and my tires caught the loose gravel on the shoulder. I violently jerked the steering wheel to correct it, but it was already too late. My car smashed into the metal guardrail, flipped over the edge, and plummeted into a deep dirt ditch, thankfully rolling violently before landing back in an upright position. I sat there in the dark, shaking uncontrollably. That was, without a doubt, the most terrifying, adrenaline-fueled moment of my entire life. If you have ever been upside down inside a rolling vehicle, you know exactly the horrifying sensation I'm talking about. I sat there in the quiet cabin for a few minutes just trying to catch my breath and make sure I wasn't bleeding. I grabbed my phone to check for service, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway. The screen was completely shattered and dead from the impact. Because of the pitch darkness and the thick fog, I couldn't tell how bad the structural damage was on the outside of the car. I turned the key and tried to drive the car out of the ditch, but the wheels just spun uselessly in the mud. It was completely stuck. Because of the steep angle at which the car was resting against the ditch wall, I could barely force my driver's side door open. When I finally managed to squeeze out, I literally had to crawl on my hands and knees up the muddy slope to get back to the main road. I stood there in absolute amazement and despair, looking down at my ruined car. I wanted to just crawl under a rock and disappear. I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. A few minutes later, I was sitting on the cold asphalt next to the guardrail, basically grieving my situation on the inside. While I was sitting there shivering, I suddenly saw two bright, hazy headlights slowly cutting through the thick fog. My first instinct was to jump up and flag them down, but a strange gut feeling made me decide to just stay quiet and observe first. A beat-up pickup truck drove past me incredibly slowly. It traveled about 20 feet past where I was sitting, stopped, and then slowly started to reverse back toward me. When the truck was positioned right next to me, the passenger side window rolled down with a loud creak. An older couple was sitting inside the cabin. The woman in the passenger seat leaned out and made a comment about how I looked like I desperately needed some help. I didn't answer her right away. They seemed polite enough, but this was the first car I had seen on this road in over an hour, and it was the middle of the night in the absolute middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. Nice or not, I was incredibly uneasy about the situation. I also don't want to be that guy, but looking at them under the dim dashboard light, they didn't physically look like the most inviting or stable people. The woman asked me a second time if I needed a tow, and I just slowly nodded my head. The driver, a very large, imposing man, got out of the vehicle without saying a word and walked to the back to grab a heavy metal chain from the bed of the truck. While he was doing that, the older woman got out of the passenger side and began slowly inching closer and closer to me. The moment she stepped near, a horrible, rancid smell hit me. The aggressive way she was physically inching toward me actually forced me to take steps backward, moving me closer to the side of their truck. It felt like she was deliberately bullying me with her personal space, forcing me to move exactly where she wanted. She started rambling rapidly about the local mountain land, and then she shifted into a bizarre, aggressive government conspiracy rant. I just kept nervously nodding my head and agreeing with everything she said, not wanting to anger her. I just wanted to see this large man pull my car out of the ditch so I could get away. But the woman was getting so close, she was literally bumping her shoulder into me while she ranted. Eventually, through her odd movements, I found myself standing right outside the closed tailgate at the back of their truck. She had basically boxed me into that specific spot. She abruptly stopped her ranting, turned her head to look at me and smiled a wide, unsettling smile. She told me that she wanted to show me something really cool that they were transporting in the bed of the truck. I immediately felt a wave of dread. I told her that it was totally okay, that I didn't need to see it, and that I just wanted to watch her husband hook up the chain to make sure he didn't need any help. But every single time I tried to physically step away from the tailgate, she would quickly slide over and cut me off. She just kept insistently repeating that I really needed to look inside the back of the truck. Right then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the large man with the chain wrapping around from the other side of the vehicle. Before I could even react, both of them were closing the distance, trapping me against the tailgate. I reluctantly turned around and looked into the truck bed. I noticed a large, heavy blue tarp laying across the floor. Something bulky was clearly hidden underneath it, but I absolutely did not want to find out what it was. The exact moment my back was turned to look at the tarp, the old woman suddenly screamed at the top of her lungs, "Paul, now!" Instantly, the heavy tarp burst open. A third person emerged from underneath it, holding a massive hunting knife. He was a younger, athletic man, and he immediately lunged over the tailgate, attempting to grab my jacket with his free hand. If a hidden attacker suddenly lunged at you from a truck bed, what would your immediate instinct be? Would you fight, freeze, or run? Let me know in the comments. I still to this day don't know how I pulled it off, but pure adrenaline allowed me to dodge his grip by basically throwing my entire body backward onto the hard ground. While I was scrambling on the asphalt, the old woman started to yell frantically, screaming insults at the two men for missing me. I scrambled to my feet and just started to run as fast as my legs could physically carry me. Instead of staying on the open road where they could easily run me down with the truck, I made a split-second decision to dive straight into the dense woods. I didn't want to take the gamble of these insane locals chasing me down the blacktop or pulling a rifle out of the cab. The younger guy from the truck bed leaped out and chased me into the dark woods. I could hear him crashing through the brush behind me, but thankfully, driven by pure survival instinct, I was able to outrun him in the dark. I found a thick thicket of bushes deep in the forest and hid there for what felt like hours. Since my phone was entirely destroyed, I had absolutely no concept of time. It felt like an eternity, but I'm sure it wasn't actually that long. The entire time I lay pressed against the dirt, I thought I could hear faint, heavy footsteps circling my position. It was probably just the natural ambient sounds of the forest at night, but I wasn't about to risk my life to find out. Just when I was finally psyching myself up to head back toward the direction of the road, I heard the chilling voice of the old woman echoing through the trees. She kept calling out for me, referring to me in a sweet, mocking voice as "Sonny boy." She wasn't standing right next to me, but she was close enough that I could clearly hear the gravel in her voice. She was close enough that if I stepped on a dry twig, she would hear it. She started shouting into the dark woods that everything was totally okay, that I could come out now, and that they had successfully pulled my car out of the ditch and just didn't want me to be scared. I may have been a fool for getting into that wreck, but I certainly wasn't falling for that obvious trap. I held my breath, clamped my hand over my mouth, and prayed to God that she would walk in the opposite direction. After a long while, the forest went completely silent again. I waited another 20 minutes before I finally snuck out of the woods and crept back to the roadside. My car was still sitting exactly where it had crashed, buried deep in the mud of the ditch. Clearly, the old woman had been boldly lying to lure me out. Worse yet, all of my car doors were now flung wide open, and my travel bags had been dragged onto the grass and completely torn apart. I tried to quickly take a mental inventory of my belongings, but almost all of my valuables and clothes were entirely gone. It also looked like they had used that massive hunting knife to maliciously shred and cut my leather seats to pieces. Their pickup truck was nowhere to be seen, but I absolutely did not want to stay with my disabled vehicle. I had a sickening feeling that they would eventually drive back to check the site again. I turned and just started walking down the dark road as fast as I could. I walked for what felt like miles until I eventually stumbled upon a brightly lit, 24-hour commercial gas station. I burst inside, looking like a total madman covered in mud, and tried explaining to the young cashier what had just happened to me. I was a complete shivering mess. The cashier understandably wouldn't let me personally touch his phone, but he did immediately call the state police for me. When the troopers finally showed up, they took my statement and used their system to call my parents' house. It took a few agonizing hours, but my older brother finally showed up at the station to pick me up. Unfortunately, the state police were almost no help at all. Because I was an out-of-state driver who was completely turned around by a detour, I couldn't provide them with the exact name of the rural road, and the thick fog had prevented me from getting a license plate or a clear make and model of the truck. I have never been happier to be riding in a car than I was driving with my brother in the middle of the bright afternoon day. I can't even begin to fathom what the true sick intentions of those backwoods freaks actually were. I don't think for a second they just wanted to rob a stranded motorist. I felt deep down that whatever they had planned for me under that tarp, it was infinitely worse than simple robbery. My parents were incredibly surprised when I finally walked through their front door. But obviously it wasn't for the happy reasons I had originally planned. That was the absolute last time I have ever driven anywhere far at night completely alone, and it will most likely be the last time I ever attempt that drive for the rest of my life. When most people think about traveling for a vacation, they almost always picture somewhere with a sunny beach. That's because the average person desperately needs a break from the constant grind of their job or school to get away and reset. And what better place to completely unwind your mind than on a nice relaxing beach with the sound of the ocean? This story, unfortunately, was the exact opposite of a relaxing getaway. A couple of years ago, my girlfriend Ashley and I planned a trip down south to enjoy some much-needed vacation time. At the time, we both worked grueling hours as floor nurses at a busy hospital. And as any nurse will happily tell you, sometimes you reach a breaking point where you absolutely need a vacation. We live up in New Hampshire, which is incredibly beautiful in its own right, but we were craving some of that intense, warm southern sun. We ended up booking a beautiful resort trip down to Key West, Florida. Ashley has a severe phobia of flying, so we decided to make the massive, over 24-hour drive all the way down the coast to the Florida Keys. Because we had accumulated so much saved paid time off, we took 2 full weeks off from the hospital. The long drive down wasn't nearly as bad as it sounds because we paced ourselves and made several fun stops along the coast. We finally arrived in Florida a few days later, and we were absolutely blown away by how amazing our resort property was. Our room opened up right onto the private ocean beach. For the first week, the trip served its purpose perfectly. But then came one terrifying night that changed everything. Our final night in Key West showed me firsthand that it doesn't matter how luxury your resort is, dangerous things completely out of your control can happen in a flash. Ashley and I were lying out on the sand late at night, watching the full moon reflect off the calm water. It was one of those rare, beautiful nights where the moonlight reflecting off the ocean was literally bright enough that it didn't even look like nighttime. Everything was illuminated in a pale silver glow. We had spread a large beach towel on the sand, and Ashley was lying comfortably in my arms. What she didn't know at the time was that I actually had a diamond engagement ring tucked safely into my shorts pocket. This was supposed to be our big, unforgettable night. I started trying to be incredibly romantic and sweet, whispering these mushy, heartfelt lines into her ear. At first, she was smiling and loving it. But then I noticed she suddenly got completely quiet. It was like she completely stopped responding to what I was saying altogether. For a second, I honestly thought she might have just fallen asleep from the ocean breeze. I playfully asked if she was still alive, and she quickly apologized for getting so quiet. She whispered that she had just gotten completely distracted by two strange people who were standing a little ways down the beach, staring directly at us. I sat up a bit on the towel and scanned the shoreline for the two she was talking about. Just as I leaned forward, we saw the two individuals immediately turn and walk straight up to us. It was an objectively beautiful girl, but she looked completely off for some strange reason. She had wild, untamed curly hair, and from what I could see of her eyes in the moonlight, they looked completely dark and devoid of expression. She was wearing just a sheer beach cover-up over her bathing suit, and she was walking hand in hand with a man. I assumed it was her boyfriend because she was holding his hand in a tight, loving way, almost leaning her entire weight onto his arm. The man had a huge, thick beard with long brown hair that was pulled back into a tight bun. He was wearing a heavy red flannel shirt that was completely unbuttoned with no shirt underneath, paired with plain bathing suit shorts. Even at night, the Florida air was incredibly warm, making the heavy flannel seem totally bizarre. Once they walked over to our towel, they didn't say a word. They just stood there. They were standing uncomfortably, aggressively close to us, because we were basically laying flat on the ground. They were literally towering directly over us. Both of them just stared down at our faces, smiling this wide, empty smile for absolutely no reason I could think of. Finally, breaking the awkward silence, Ashley sat up and said, "Excuse me, can we help you with something?" The woman, keeping that wide smile plastered on her face, said in a slow, eerily soft voice, "You two are quite beautiful, you know." I was completely speechless and at a total loss for words. My girlfriend, being a tough ER nurse who doesn't take any crap from anyone, just flatly said, "Thanks. You can leave us alone now." The smiling woman slowly looked at me, then looked back down at Ashley and said in a haunting, flat voice, "No, thank you." All while this bizarre dialogue was happening, she never once stopped smiling. Her large boyfriend just stood there next to her, completely stiff and not moving a single muscle, but still wearing that exact same empty smile. After another agonizing moment of silence, a second couple suddenly walked over from the shadows of the boardwalk. It was very late, so the main resort beach was entirely deserted besides us. For a brief second, I thought this new couple might be coming over to help us out, as our body language clearly showed we were uncomfortable. I couldn't have been more wrong. The second couple walked straight over and, just like the first two, stood directly over our towel, looming over us. And just like the others, both of them were wearing giant, vacant smiles. This new woman also had a beach cover-up on, but she was sporting these high pigtails that were completely uneven and asymmetrical. Her boyfriend had really curly, shaggy-looking hair. The first woman looked up at the newcomers, pointed down at us and said, "Look, a new couple." I honestly didn't know if I was being pranked by some weird locals for a hidden camera show, or if this was real life. I knew they weren't technically doing anything overtly illegal or threatening at this exact point, but every single alarm bell in my brain was screaming at top volume. Nobody stands that physically close to complete strangers on an empty beach unless they are up to something malicious. Their unsettling smiles and completely stoic frozen posture just gave off a deeply evil vibe. I was getting incredibly unsettled, and these four people just kept slowly shifting their weight, inching closer and closer to where Ashley and I were trapped on the sand. They had gotten so close that the first girl's bare foot was literally touching the hair on my leg. I could tell Ashley had officially hit her breaking point. I knew I had to do something to protect her. I finally stood up fully, stepped directly into the personal space of one of the guys and said in a firm voice, "Take one more step." I thought maybe if I stood up and showed some physical dominance, they would realize we weren't easy targets and back off. I'm a bigger guy physically, but I am not an intimidating person by nature. Ashley always lovingly called me a teddy bear. I am not someone who naturally inspires fear in men. Instead of backing away, all four of these beach lunatics suddenly burst into a synchronized, hysterical laugh. I felt a wave of anger and annoyance, but weirdly, I almost felt a brief sense of comfort from the laughter. I thought to myself that maybe the laugh was confirmation that this really was just a weird, elaborate joke. Once again, I was dead wrong. While the other three continued to laugh hysterically, the large guy in the red flannel suddenly lunged forward at me. Had absolutely zero time to raise my hands or defend myself. Both of the men immediately tackled me to the sand and started violently beating me up, throwing heavy punches. I couldn't do anything but cover my head, desperately hoping the engagement ring didn't slide out of my pocket into the sand. While they were hitting me, I could hear Ashley screaming bloody murder, but the two smiling girls just sat there on the sand and laughed at her. Ashley tried to physically intervene to pull the men off me, but the second girl with the uneven pigtails forcefully shoved her back down to the ground. The two guys then roughly picked me up by my shirt and slammed me back down into the sand right next to Ashley. And with the absolute blink of an eye, all four of their wide smiles instantly vanished, turning into faces of pure, unadulterated rage. The man in the red flannel started frantically fumbling his hand through a hidden inside pocket of his shirt. Even though I couldn't see through the shadows, I knew with absolute certainty he was searching for a pocket knife, a gun, or some other kind of weapon. Seeing his hand in his pocket, a surge of pure survival adrenaline hit me, and I pulled off an unthinkable move. I don't know what came over me. It was pure fight-or-flight asset management. From my position on the ground, I threw a wild, incredibly hard kick straight into the ankle of the girl standing nearest to me. It was a solid hit. She shrieked and stumbled backward into the loose sand. Her sudden stumbling completely distracted the two men for a split second, causing them to look away from me. In that tiny window of opportunity, I lunged forward, grabbed Ashley's hand, scrambled to my feet, and we ran as fast as our legs could humanly carry us toward the brightly lit resort buildings. As we sprinted, I could feel warm blood pouring down my face from my nose, and my ribs were in absolute agony. I looked back over my shoulder just one time as we hit the boardwalk, and I could see the two couples still standing back on the sand. They weren't even chasing us, they were just watching us run. We burst into our room, violently locked the heavy deadbolts, slid the security chains into place, and turned off every single light so no one could see inside. It was an absolutely horrible feeling. To this day, I still don't know why, but we didn't call the police that night. Obviously, in hindsight, we absolutely should have contacted the authorities right away. But at that exact traumatizing moment, we were so consumed by fear that we didn't want to do anything that might draw attention or bring those people to our specific room number. The next morning, the very second the sun came up, we packed our bags and checked out early so we could leave for New Hampshire. The entire time we loaded up our car in the parking lot, we kept frantically looking over our shoulders. Every single person we saw out of the corner of our eye, we instantly assumed was one of those beach couples. We didn't want to take a single risk of running into those mysterious strangers a second time. As we were finally driving out of the resort parking lot onto the main public street, we spotted the two girls standing on the sidewalk corner. They were looking in the opposite direction and didn't see our car initially. We held our breath. But as our car pulled past the intersection right next to them, both girls suddenly turned their heads and noticed us through the glass. Instead of running or looking angry, both of them instantly broke into wide smiles and waved at us enthusiastically, like we were old high school friends. It was sickening. Once we safely hit the highway and were miles away from Key West, Ashley finally called the resort front desk and informed the manager exactly what had happened to us on their beach the night before. The manager apologized profusely over the phone and promised they would have security look into the matter, but I am highly doubtful anything was ever actually done about it. I realize that this isn't your typical supernatural story with ghosts or monsters, but to me, the reality of it was so much worse. We are incredibly lucky we managed to escape that beach with no permanent, severe physical injuries. Unfortunately, the psychological memory of that horrible, smiling night will most likely stay with both of us for the rest of our lives. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Midnight Narrative. The world out there can be a beautiful place, but as our storytellers learned, danger can hide behind a friendly smile, a foggy road, or a secluded cabin in the woods. If you enjoyed these stories, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and share this video with your friends, so you never miss out on more terrifying midnight narratives. Thank you so much for spending your night with me. I politely invite you to come back again soon for more true, chilling stories. Until next time, stay safe out there, and sweet dreams.